with you within these 2 hours. Still then I'll try. So first we'll focus on Java. In the last class we have discussed about the empire of Sriwijaya, which developed in Sumatra, and today we'll focus on Java. There were several states in ancient Java, and according to some historians, during 1st century AD, there developed a rich city that was known as Sitiao. However, we don't get any details, save some archaeological remains of that Sitiao. Apart from that, since 7th century AD, we get better information regarding the political and cultural condition of Java. There was a kingdom known as Mataram in south central Java, and this Mataram, we know about Mataram from the inscription of Kangal. It was written in Sanskrit, and at that time a king, his ruled there. His name was Sanjaya. He was a Shaivite, and the inscription was composed establishment of a Shiva Linga in Java. The actual place was known as Kunjar Kunjo, and it was regarding the place, the description ran as the place was full of gold mines and food items. So according to some historians, gold is not available in Java, so maybe the place Kunjaro Kunjo was located in Malay, or someone wrote that this was located in South India near the Tamnaparni river. Later on, his inscriptions are also found in central Java. The region was Kedu. And in that inscription are the names of other rulers of the dynasty are also available. Everybody was described as Sri Maharaja. This was their title. Probably Sanjaya was the first ruler of the Mataram dynasty, and he was followed by Rakran, Panankaran, and so on. There is a list of the name of the rulers. And this Mataram, as I told you, it was located in central Java. This Sanjaya conquered Bali, Sumatra, and Cambodia, and his empire extended up to the border of China. According to some experts on ancient Javanese history, there were several small rulers, and among whom whoever was the best and capable, he was known as Rakran, and other small rulers, they used to be his vassals. And when that Rakran's influence was spread over region, at that time he used to establish a chandi or mausoleum like that, and whoever, which god was his favorite, the chandi was established in his or her memoriam. That means the god was the titular deity of that chandi. And the victorious ruler, actually he prayed to meet him after his death with his favorite deity. This was the central concept. And probably that Shiva Linga, which was established in 732, and the inscription of Kanagal was composed in that connection, this was his chandi. He was a Shaivite, and this was his chandi, and he was the Rakrayan of Mataram. Later on, the greater kingdom was also known as Mataram. The inscription was written in Sanskrit. Apart from that, the Matarams contributed to the cultural enrichment of Java. Several temples, Shaivite temples, were found there in the Dieng Plateau, and these temples, some connection, cultural connection and temple style. And there is one very interesting image of Bhataru Guru with mustache and beards. Probably he was the famous sage, Indian sage Augusto. According to some experts, this was the spiritual teacher or preacher from India, and this was the image of actually Shiva. Next we come to the Shailendras. These Shailendras were Mahajanist dynasty. Some historians observe the connection between the Funanis dynasty with these Shailendras, because they think that there is a similarity of inner meaning of their dynasty. Funan means the ruler of the mountain, and Shailendra means the ruler of the mountain. After 750 AD, there was the increase of Mahajani Buddhism on Mataram, and according to Vlek, he is an expert on ancient Javanese history. He emphasized on the cultural connection between the Shailendras and the Palas of Bengal. And he wrote that the script, the religion, and the names of places and cities all point towards the same province of India as the country of origin of this dynasty, namely towards Bengal. Last time I told you about the connection between the Shailendras and the Palas, and the story of Balaputra Deva, who built a monastery in Bodh Gaya, and the then Pala ruler Devapala granted the revenue of some villages for the maintenance of that monastery. I think you remember the story. And at that time, Nalanda was famous for Mahajanist culture. It was internationally famous and a well-known university. Buddhist scholars from all over the world came here to study Mahajani Buddhism. And these Shailendras established contact with other states of Southeast Asia, preferably Indianized states. Probably they tried to establish their control over the maritime route towards China. And sometimes they attacked on Ligor, Champa, Tonking. In 802 AD, the then Khmer ruler, Jayavarman II, he recovered Lower Chenla area with the help of the Shailendras, and he unified Cambodia. We'll come to that point in the next class. And for some time, Javanese culture influenced Cambodian and Champa's cultural system. For some time, Ligor became a center of Mahajani Buddhism. We get a list of the Shailendra rulers, though this list is not complete. And probably during the rule of Vishnu, he was a Shailendra ruler, and his time was 775 to 782 AD. The celebrated Borobudur Stup, it was built during his rule, and this period is known as the golden era of the history of Indonesia. This Borobudur was a Mahajani Buddhist citadel. I am just describe a little bit. Just wait for a minute. Though Borobudur is a Mahajanist citadel, still then some historians think that this was an expression of the ancestral system of ancestral worship of the region. And undoubtedly, this Borobudur represents the highest expression of the artistic genius of the Shailendra period. And it is utterly unlike any other Javanese monument. It is not a temple with an interior, but an immense stupa in the form of stone terraces, covering the upper part of a natural hill, on the flattened top of which stands the central stupa. The height is 150 feet. The walls of the stupa are adorned with bas-relief sculptures illustrating Mahajanist texts. There are thousands of such sculptures, and there are 400 statues of the Buddha. The base of the stupa has a series of reliefs depicting the effects of good and evil deeds in daily life, producing karma. And from the religious point of view, this sanctuary is very impressive, and it poses as a textbook of Buddhism as taught by the Nalanda school. Though the sculptural style follows the classic models of Gupta India, the reliefs are not Indian. Sorry. The subject matter is, or the figures are Javanese. And in a way, they provide a inner picture of Javanese life and customs. And one interesting point is that while I have already told you that there is some similarity with Indian style of sculpture, and what the Javanese are very interesting is the point that the Javanese artists, while adopting the Indian models, changed them in conformity with their own tradition. Even the conventionalized figures are often given a vitality that seems to break through formalism, and there are many human touches. I think now we may proceed to the other part of ancient Javanese accounts. And one point is that I have missed it, that according to D. Kasparis, the complete name of Borobudur was Bhumi Shambara Bhudharo. I have already sent the name to you. Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Just actually, did you send the screenshot? I can't get it. Please send. Yes, I think it has. Please send one screenshot of the class. So Bhumi Shambhar Budhar was its original name, and he found this name in an inscription of 842 AD. And actually, the significance of the name is that this is like a mountain. The shape of the Borobudur is like a mountain. And this what is this mountain? This mountain symbolizes the amount of virtue saved by or accumulated by the Bodhisattva in the 10 stages of his life. That means, in a way, this Bhumishambhar Budhar symbolizes the accumulated virtue of the life of Bodhisattva. And probably the Shailendra ruler who built this, he aspired to be a Bodhisattva after his death. So according to Kasparis, this Borobudur symbolized Buddhist, the worship of the Buddha, and Later on, Java attained the pinnacle of glory at least up to 13th century. They introduced a new type of culture and they patronized Mahayana Buddhism and created several memorable architectural complexes. They introduced pre-Nagari alphabets. Now we may point to other parts of the political development in other parts of Java. Mataram was there, and 10th century is very important in Java because since that period Javanese culture was clearly clearly emerged in literature, drama, music, and so on. Some Sanskrit books were translated in Javanese. Towards the middle of 10th century, there was the development of another state. They were also Mataram. It was in eastern side of Java. They were more Indonesian by character. So, from this period, Java was more connected with Malacca, Sumatra, and carried on maritime trade. The Mataram dynasty of Eastern Java was established by King Sindok. The dynasty ruled at least up to 1222 AD. He used to rule the state with his queen. And after his death, his daughter became the ruler. So in this way, we see that during this period, the women of Java became very important even in administration. And gradually, the Javanese cultural norms were formed in this period. Another renowned ruler of this dynasty was King Dharmabhangsha. During his rule, some collections of the Adat or Javanese laws were completed, and some Sanskrit books were translated in Javanese. Mahabharata was their source of inspiration, and some part of Javanese literature emerged with a deep influence of Mahabharata. This Dharmabhangsha was also a great warrior. He was actually he died in 1006, and the next ruler was King Oirolongo. Oirolongo was renowned as the best rulers of ancient Java. The main episodes of his regime are found in the Calcutta inscription of 1041 AD. Meanwhile, in this time, the Cholas attacked Sumatra, and for some time, their supremacy was established over the Srivijayas. I will not go into details of this period and this Mataram dynasty was followed by the Kediri and next the Singosari rule. I'll not go into the details of this, and finally we get the Mojopohit period, end of 13th century to 16th century. The Mojopohits ruled over there, and this was in short the historical account of ancient Java. So now we may, do you have any questions? Hello? Any query? Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
What do you want to know?
Ma'am, I have no query, ma'am. I have nothing to ask, ma'am.
Thank you. আচ্ছা, আমি একটা কথা বলছিলাম যে যারা বাংলায় পড়ছো, আমাকে কেউ কেউ বললে যে বাংলা বই তোমরা জোগাড় করতে পারছো না, কিন্তু তোমরা তো তোমাদের মধ্যে কেউ কেউ আমায় বলেছো ক্লাসে যে বাংলা বই তোমরা দেখেছো, তাহলে তোমরা প্লিজ একটু শেয়ার করো। ইংরেজি বই তো প্রচুর রয়েছে, বাংলা বইয়ের কিছু অভাব আছে। আমি কয়েকটি বইয়ের কথা বলেও দিয়েছি তোমাদের। অবশ্য শুধু বাংলা বই পড়লে ভালো নম্বর হবে না, তোমাদের মূল ইংরেজি বইগুলো পড়াটা দরকার আছে। বুঝতে পেরেছো? কাজে নিজেদের মধ্যে শেয়ার করে পড়বে। দেখো, সোর্স অফ ইনফরমেশন সব একই হয়, এবার সেই সোর্সটা থেকে তোমরা কে কিভাবে রিপ্রেজেন্ট করবে, কিভাবে তথ্যগুলোকে প্রশ্ন অনুযায়ী সাজাবে, এর উপরে নম্বরটা কম বেশি হয়। কাজে সোর্স অফ ইনফরমেশন গুলো তোমরা যতটা পারো, যেহেতু এখন লাইব্রেরি যাওয়া যাচ্ছে না এমন একটা পরিস্থিতি, হয়তো সামনে সব এইবারে হয়তো খুলে যাবে, জানি না, বলতে পারবো না, কিন্তু সামনে পরীক্ষা, অতএব তোমরা প্রত্যেকেই, আমি আশা করব যে সবাই সবার দিকে বন্ধুত্বের হাত বাড়িয়ে দেবে এবং যে যা পাচ্ছ সবাই সবার সঙ্গে সে, এখানে তোমরা কোনো রেষারেষির মধ্যে যেও না। আচ্ছা, যারা বাংলায় পড়ছো তাদের কি কোনো অসুবিধা হলো এই অংশটা নিয়ে? হ্যালো?
না ম্যাম, ঠিক আছে।
ঠিক আছে তো? আচ্ছা, so now we may proceed to another part of our discussion, that is Cambodia. This is a very difficult job because the Angkor Empire was one of the greatest empires of ancient Southeast Asia. They were known as the Khmer Kingdom of Cambodia. And you know about Funan, that Funan disappeared in the middle of the 6th century. and it was followed by the emergence of a feudatory state known as Chenla. This Chenla was a very strong state, and it occupied the lower and middle Mekong area and actually covered modern northern Cambodia and the southern part of the Kingdom of Laos. In this context, we come across a Khmer legend which described the origin of the royal family to the marriage of a hermit, Kombu Swayambhuva, with the celestial nymph Mera, and the marriage was organized by Lord Shiva. In this way, the dynasty was known as Kambuja, and the Khmers adopted it as a result of Indianization.
Ma'am, can you just repeat the name of the hermit?
Kombu Swayambhuva. Actually, this Angkor, this was a very large dynasty. This Khmer dynasty was very large. Khmer was the name of the culture, their language, and this was a very large dynasty. Certainly, I will not go into the details of the accounts. I will emphasize on the special features of the dynasty and obviously how, let us see how far I can cover. So, Jayavarman II, he was the founder of the Angkor kingdom. And he came from Java. It is known that he came from Java to assume the crown. The information regarding his rule is available in an inscription that is known as Sodok Kak Thomstel. I don't know what is the actual name, but I just describe the name as Sodok Kak Thomstel. And the date of the inscription was 11th century AD.
Ma'am, will you please tell the spelling of the inscription?
I have already sent you, dear. You see?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
We are indebted to the French historians and archaeologists regarding this Khmer history. They have done a great job, and this inscription was translated by Louis Finot in 1915. The striking feature of Jayavarman's regime is that he established several capitals. The first one was Indrapuro, and it has been identified with an archaeological site on the lower Mekong. And you just notice that the Khmer kings were highly Hinduized. In all aspects of their rule, they actually sought the help of some Brahmana. The Brahman became the royal priest. And this Jayavarman II, he also took into service a Brahman known as Shiva Koivallo, who became the first priest. And a new cult, a cult of Devorajo, was established as the official religion. The meaning of the Devorajo was the God King. What is that? It was a form of Shaivism, centering on the worship of the phallic emblem or lingo of Lord Shiva. And it was accepted as the king's sacred personality transmitted to him by Shiva through the medium of his Brahmin chaplain. I think it is quite difficult to understand, no?
Ma'am, can you just repeat the name of the priest?
Okay. The priest was Shiva Koivallo. And he introduced the worship of a new cult that was known as Devorajo cult. What was that? This was the worship of a Shiva Linga, and it was thought that the king's sacred personality was transmitted to him by Lord Shiva through the medium of his Brahmin chaplain. That means the royal priest was the mediator between the god and the king. You understand? And why it will be worshipped like that? Because the prosperity of the kingdom was to be considered as bound up with the welfare of the royal lingo. Its sanctuary was at the summit of a temple mountain, natural or artificial, which was at the center of the capital and was regarded as the axis of the universe. Almost every king of this dynasty built up a natural or artificial mountain temple at the center of their capital. And most of the time there was some water body near the temple, and it was considered as Ganga. So, according to the experts, this adoption of the cult by Jayavarman was a gesture of independence. And it also signified his claim to be a Chakravartin. Chakravartin is the concept of universal monarch. And the Khmer king was considered as Chakravartin. And from this time, that means the date of his accession to the throne was 802 AD, that is 9th century. So from his time onwards, for several centuries, every Khmer king used to raise his temple mountain for the preservation of the royal lingo, which enshrined his sacred ego. And in this way, in the Angkor region, you will see still now the existence of several great temples. So Indrapura was the first of a number of capitals founded by him, and after that he moved towards the region of the Great Lake, and huge supply of fish and rice from its floodplain enabled him to sustain a large population. There he planted his second capital at Horiharalayo. That means the abode of Harihara. The site is known as Rulos. A group of ruins are there, and if you check in the net, you will see these Rulos. The remains are there. The third capital was known as Amorendrapuro. The site is not known. Finally, he moved to another place where he built Mahendra Parvata. And several temples have been excavated there, and his temples look like pyramids. Actually, he instituted a new era by a formal declaration of Cambodian independence and by the establishment of the ritual for the worship of the Devaraja. He died in 850, and in northern Cambodia, his area was, the border was in the region of the Great Lake. His reign is very impressive because he was the founder of the greatness of the Angkor Empire, and from his reign, the pyramid sanctuary marked the center of the royal city. At its summit, which was considered as the center of the universe, the Devaraja entered into relationship with the divine world. He himself was the god to whom his own lifetime the temple was dedicated. At his death, it became his mausoleum. Next, we will discuss about Surya Varman II. I have to skip some rulers because of the time constraint, you know. This Surya Varman II, his date was 1113 to 50 AD. That means 12th century. He was the most powerful king of Khmer history. And the inscriptions of his reign are silent regarding his campaigns. However, from other sources, we get to know that he marched against Champa, Annam, the Mons and Thais of the Menam Valley. He also spent most of his lifetime in North and founded a number of temples. He was the first king of Cambodia who entered into diplomatic relation with China, and he sent several embassies there. He was famous as a builder. He was the founder of the celebrated Angkor Wat. It was the largest religious building in the world, and the central sanctuary was 130 feet high. It stands on a square terrace, 40 feet high and 750 feet square. Just imagine At the corners, there are 4 towers connected by galleries and communicating the central shrine by covered passages. Around this immense central building is a lofty wall of galleries with towers at its 4 corners. This is enclosed by an outer square of colonnades. Beyond this, there is a further enclosure measuring 850 by 1000 meters and surrounded by a wall of laterite and sandstone. The whole area was surrounded by a moat 200 meters wide, enclosing a total area of nearly a square mile. Mythology says this what was built by Indra, the Lord of Heaven, who sailed down to earth for the purpose. Originally, the great pinnacles, 9 great pinnacles were there, those were plated with gold, and the sculptures were of incredible richness, covered the walls in high and low relief, all ablaze with color. The central shrine, it was a Vishnuvite temple, Vaishnava temple, and the central shrine contained a gold statue of Vishnu mounted on a Garuda. And while in festivals, this image was taken out of the temple. It was a representation of the king deified as Vishnu, and a majestic shrine was erected in order to become his mausoleum when he died. This is an interesting piece. You see that the kings used to build up his mausoleum during his lifetime. Though this temple was, the central deity was Vishnu, still then Shaivism was important, and many Shaivite scenes were depicted on the walls. In a way, this was the blending of 2 famous Hindu cults, that are Vaishnavism and Shaivism. The next ruler, the next important, I think he was important, was Jayavarman the 7th. Actually, during his rule, the sway of Angkor extended more, and we get informations regarding his regime from an inscription dated 1186. It was known as Sefong inscription and was found near Mekong. According to the Chinese sources, this Jayavarman the 7th exercised nominal suzerainty over part of the Malay Peninsula. And they also assert that the kingdom of Pagan, that was a Burmese kingdom, was a dependency of Cambodia at this time.
Ma'am, please can you repeat this point?
Yes.
Ma'am, you said that according to Chinese sources, he exerted nominal superiority over
Malay Peninsula. And they also assert that the kingdom of Pagan was a dependency of Cambodia at that time. One interesting point is here that in Burma, there was an interesting development during the rule of his contemporary, that is Naropati Sithu. Naropati Sithu was the ruler of Pagan at that time, and during his reign in Burma, there was an interesting development. What was that? Among the companions of a monk, he was a Mon. He belonged to the Mon community. His name was Chapata. He established a chapter of Theravada Buddhism after the style of Singholo in 1190. And one Khmer prince, probably he was the son of this Jayavarman VII. He was the companion of that Mon priest Chapata. And the teachings of this new sect were brought by missionary monks to the states of the Menam Valley, ultimately to Cambodia. And it had revolutionary effect. Why? Because all the prevailing religious systems like Shaivism, Vaishnavism, Mahajana Buddhism were imposed from above. And this Hinojana Buddhism were preached to the people, and it stimulated a popular movement which ultimately carried the Khmers into the Hinojana fold, which they never deserted. This is a very, very important point. You will understand why after some time. This Jayavarman the seventh also was very extravagant regarding the building activities. And he built Angkor Thom. It was unparalleled in its immensity and in the haste and carelessness with which it was carried out. Maybe with the lessons of the charm invasion in view, he set himself to build an impregnable city. And this Angkor Thom was planned on a much smaller scale than Yasodharapura. Angkor Thom was enclosed by a wide moat. This was a common feature of the Angkorian constructions. Everything was enclosed by a wide moat, some 8 miles in circumference, and a formidable laterite wall supported on the inside by an enormous earth embankment. 5 stone causeways crossed the moat and gave access to the city through 5 monumental gates, each with towers surmounted by gigantic heads with 4 human faces. The causeways themselves are flanked on each side by balustrades formed by rows of giants holding on their knees a naga, whose 7 heads rose fan-wise at each end of the causeway. This Naga emblem, this was their royal symbol, or the symbol of their community. So at the center of the city rose the strangest monument. It was known as the Bayon. It was next to Angkor Wat, the largest temple of the Angkor group. It looks like a pyramidal temple with its central mass crowned by a tower of gold bearing 4 gigantic human faces. These gigantic human faces are a very interesting style of sculpture. Around it, from an inner and outer gallery, arose many smaller 4-faced towers, the number of which has been estimated as 50. And one interesting point is that it was built in such a hurry that stone was piled upon stone without any form of cement. Its decorations were the finest in Khmer architecture, and its architectural motif was one of the most striking in the world. The faces were so impressive and disconcertingly confront the viewer that this seems to be the portraits of the ruler himself in the guise of Mahajanist Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who is usually referred to in Southeast Asia as Lokeshwar. Under him, Mahajanism became for a time the dominant religion in Cambodia, and he took the blending process further by the substitution of a Buddha Raja cult with its center at the Bayon. In the 20th century, a French archaeologist Trouve discovered a huge statue of Buddha in a pit under the central tower of the Bayon. This may be the representation of the Buddha Raja, and it was buried there due to the violent Hindu reaction after Jayavarman's death, when the Bayon became a Shaivite shrine and the Lingo cult replaced that of Lokeshwara. Like Java, Cambodia can also be described as a state where women were highly educated and honored. Like his chief queen, Jaya Raja Devi, it is written in the inscription that she filled the earth with a shower of magnificent gifts, and after her death, her elder sister Indra Devi became the queen, and she became a distinguished teacher of the Buddhist doctrine. And she composed in perfect Sanskrit one inscription which gives her husband's biography. However, this was the period when the first signs of decay appeared. Why? Maybe Jayavarman VII was the greatest of all the Khmer monarchs, but his reign represented the apogee of Cambodia. He impoverished his people with heavy taxation and insatiable demands for forced labor and military service. During the 13th century, the details of Khmer history are difficult to find. There are no important inscriptions, and the Chinese dynastic histories are silent about them. And for that period, the chief sources of information are Cham and Thai inscription and some Cambodians also. No great ruler followed him. And you know, we come across the, just a minute, I had to skip huge portions. Just a minute. Just a minute. Actually, we don't get the references to Devaraja worship after Jayavarman VII, and one of his remarkable contribution was that he established large number of hospitals and arranged for treatment throughout his country. This is a very exceptional quality of the ruler, and experts of Ayurveda were brought from outside, and arrangement for treatment were organized by them. Besides, he also he built some roads, arranged for some retreats like that. Now we come to the last days of the Empire of Angkor. According to Briggs, he is the famous historian of the history of Cambodia. Briggs observed that Siam attacked Cambodia, and the people migrated from the capital Angkor Thom, Leiden capital, and these were responsible for its decline. Obviously, these were important episodes, but if we bear in mind the greatness of Angkor, its power, then we come to know that these were not so important factors behind the decay of such a huge empire. So actually, the excessive love for architecture was certainly responsible for their decline. Some minutes back, I referred to the point that people were tortured for money. It was mandatory to devote their labor for the building of huge temple complexes. All these elements created some opposition among the people. And definitely there was a pressure exercised on the revenue system. Due to the attack of the Thais, many areas were slipped away from Cambodia's control. This had adverse effect on revenue collection. Even these economic losses affected the building of temples. People migrated outside from Cambodia. As a result, there was a lack of labor. Another point is that the introduction of Hinojanism, just now I told you, this Hinojanism was a simple method of religious practice. The extravagant practices of Hinduism, Mahajanism, the control of the royal priests, the religious customs, expensive religious customs, worship of numerous deities, all this actually created opposition, incited opposition among the common people. The rulers were not connected with the common people. Why? Because they were supposed to be the human representative of the God of heaven. And he was completely controlled by the royal priest. So these type of affairs were no more acceptable to the people who came to know about the much simpler tenet of Hinojanism. And we see some rulers of Angkor, like Indravarman III, he followed Hinojanism. No doubt the attack of Siam was very important. Till then, according to Briggs, the impact of this Sinhalese Hinojanism was more important than other aspects. Now we come to another important aspect of Khmer civilization. Actually, the students of Khmer history used to ask a very pertinent question. What is that? That how could an agricultural community have become rich enough to produce such a magnificent range of monuments, which are incomparable for number, size, and perfection. One French archaeologist, Grosselier, he actually took the aid of aerial photography and discovered a very interesting aspect of Khmer history. What is that? He wrote that agricultural hydraulics was the answer to this intriguing question. How? The Khmers had inherited methods of irrigation from the Funanis people, and they found the Angkor region ideal for the purpose of constructing a system of water utilization which would cause the soil to yield its best, its utmost in the service of man. It was a system designed to solve the problem posed by too much and too heavy monsoon rain within too short a time. What did they do? They constructed a vast system of water conservation, which ensured that as much water as possible was conserved during the rains, so that during the dry season, it could be used rationally for both human consumption and the permanent irrigation of paddy fields. Aerial photography has enabled the plan of this remarkable system to be plotted. It depended upon the construction of immense water storage tanks. They are known as barai. Even one had the capacity of holding 30 million cubic meter water. It's supplied with an ingenious apparatus for carrying of the water as and when it was required. And the whole region, it measured up to 12.5 million acres, was minutely divided into square paddy fields capable of yielding 3 and even 4 harvests a year. And the complex net of waterways served other purposes also. What was that? It protected the soil from diluvial erosion through uncontrolled flooding in the rainy season. It seems to have controlled the annual inundation of the Great Tonle Sap Lake. Moreover, it provided an efficient means of travel and transport at any season of the year. We know that there were the complexes were covered with the boundary wall. There was a moat, and these moats they formed an integral part of it because materials from the quarries were brought direct to the building sites by way of these moats. So interesting the system of their water conservation and water transportation also. The city was no doubt a huge urban space. Besides, it was a collection of waterworks stretching far and wide beyond the palace and immediate temples, with a considerable population densely settled along its causeways and canals, and much of its land cut up into cultivated holdings. According to modern researchers, each and every Khmer king had to do some work of public interest. It was almost mandatory for them. Particularly, they undertook the work of irrigation before starting his own temple mountain. And actually, the Khmer king was accepted as the Debo Raja, the intermediary between men and the divine powers, and the upholder of the established dharma, which was handed over to him by his ancestors. As well as he was the intercessor with the spirit world for the fertility of his realm. It was his duty to appease the spirit world, as his city was the image of the universe, interpreted in terms of the Hindu Mount Meru Parbat. It is now clear to the historians that he must also be seen as the creator and director of the public works designed to ensure prosperity of his people. Thus, the religious and economic systems were intimately bound up with one another. So the Angkor economy and the organization of society which it entailed depended upon a management of water. The utilization was controlled. It was highly complex and artificial in character. Therefore, any interference with its running could have extremely serious consequences. So long as the rulers were public-spirited and people were content to play the part assigned to them in keeping the vast mechanism going, Angkor prospered. And from 802 until far into the 12th century, the heartland of the Khmer Empire enjoyed quite exceptional tranquility. However, royal megalomania, showing itself in increasing extravagance in building and in wasteful wars of aggression, undermined the economy and bred discontent with the established order. When the machine was already beginning to show signs of strength, the persistent tirades deep into the metropolitan area ultimately wrecked it beyond repair. So, I think you have understood, you have followed my way of discussion with you. Do you have any questions? And যারা বাংলায় পড়ছো তাদের কি কিছু বুঝতে অসুবিধা হয়েছে?
না ম্যাম।
অসুবিধা হয়নি তো?
No, ma'am.
আচ্ছা, আমি তোমাদের একটু সময় দিচ্ছি, আমি 4:30 ছেড়ে দেবো, তোমরা একটু দেখো তোমাদের কোথাও কিছু অসুবিধা আছে কিনা, তাহলে সেটা বলে দেওয়া যাবে। আজকে আমার ক্লাস শেষ হয়ে গেল।
Ma'am,
বলো।
ma'am, could you please repeat the cult of Lokeshwara?
হ্যাঁ, লোকেশ্বরা। হ্যাঁ, কি হয়েছে?
Yes, ma'am. Like it means like the Devaraja cult, like it was replaced by the Lokeshwara cult or what?
Yes, Devaraja cult was the cult of Shaivism. And when there was the Mahajani Buddhism, it came, under its influence there was the Buddha Raja cult. With the same ideas, the God became changed. As per my, actually I have tried to discuss. Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
You are there. In my first class, I covered the theories on state in ancient Southeast Asia, theories of state formation, and I have tried to discuss most of the important theories regarding this. And next, my topic was Funan and Champa, the earliest states, very powerful two states were Funan and Champa. Next, I discussed about the, you see in your syllabus, there are references to early state formation in Indonesia and Cambodia. And in Indonesia, last day I have discussed about Sriwijaya. It was one of the greatest commercial powers. And today, in my first class, I have discussed about the Shoilendras. They were one of the builder of the largest, one of the largest religious temple complex of the world, that is Borobudur. They built that Borobudur. And next, we discussed about the Matarams. They built another big temple complex that is in Plambanan, that is a Shoibite temple complex, and their achievements, how the Javanese culture emerged, and it was articulated in literature, in art motifs, in performing arts, and so on. And my last topic was the Khmer Empire of Angkor. And since this is a huge account, huge historical account, I have to cut short it. And I have focused on the special features of the Angkor rulers. That is their matrilineal family system, the Devaraja cult, their public works, and all these things, their independent activities, the unification of Cambodia, all of these were their special features. And lastly, I have discussed about how did this huge empire system, it declined, and how did they manage such a economic proficiency, despite being an agricultural state. So this is all. So you don't have any other question to ask me? Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So we may leave now.
ম্যাম আমাদের ইন্টারনালের টপিক গুলো কবে দেবেন?
আমি লিপিদির কাছে সব দিয়ে দেব।
থ্যাংক ইউ ম্যাম।
উনি তোমাদেরকে জানাবেন।
ওকে ম্যাম।
Okay? So best of luck and goodbye. I'm leaving now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you ম্যাম।
Welcome. Stay well.